What's up, y'all? Cam here. I've got an exciting one for you today. I main tanked Gnomeregan on my Guardian Feral Druid yesterday because the guild needed me to. That was also when the changes went live that increased swipe damage and threat generation, among other things, which we'll get into here in a second. It felt really good. We had the fastest clear time of our 5 guild groups. We had no deaths, no wipes, obviously. And I also ended up getting top 27 in the world on boss DPS, so that's exciting. But I wanted to use this video to talk about why Feral is better now, not just the changes that were made yesterday as of the time of this video, but also what they got at level 40 and the talent tree that I'm working with. And then I want to go ahead a little deeper into my actual experience, what I would suggest as far as what buttons to hit on smaller pulls, on medium-sized pulls, larger pulls, and boss fights. And so that way, if you want to go Feral tank yourself, you're free to. Enjoy the video. Briefly covering the changes that they made yesterday, they increased the damage of swipe by 10% of your attack power. Now for me, this ended up being 60 to 70 additional damage, which is huge considering the base rank of this at rank 3 does, I think, 26 damage. So I was creating about 225s with these swipes now, which is insanely higher compared to the 50 or so that it was before. And I also noticed that the greatly increased threat was very noticeable. I was pulling mobs, swiping a couple times, and just keeping threat on all of them, even through mages. It was very powerful. I think Druid really will shine in those smaller 3 or 4 pack pulls. Maybe not the same as a Paladin with 20 mobs, but still very, very good in that scenario. We also had a change to Berserk, which made Lacerate hit 3 targets. This isn't incredibly useful in Gnomer because a lot of them are just solo fights. You can use it on trash, obviously, but the main part or place where this would be valuable would be the menagerie fight when you're pulling the chicken and the squirrel, and maybe even the dragon if you're doing some taunt later in. Then you can just pop Berserk on the pull, spam Lacerate, put Lacerate on all the targets, and then keep them up through the rest of the fight. I also want to talk just more in general, the package itself and what made Feral better. Now 1 and 2 I just mentioned, so I'm not going to cover them specifically here, but we also got a rune for boots called Survival Instincts. Now I think there's a part of this rune that gets overlooked a lot. So there is an active that's like a Warrior's Last Stand ability, gives you 30% additional health for I think about 20 seconds, and then you lose the health, which is also very useful. That kept me alive in one of the fights. But we also have a passive here that when you are dodging an attack, you generate 5 rage, which means that that's fueling your rage for more swipes. So having agility obviously is fantastic on druids, and so using that dodge and leveraging that, the more mobs you get, the more rage you're getting, the more swipes you can spam. So I think that's a very powerful piece of this. And then you also have access to 40 talent points to put in the Feral tree. I'll go ahead and walk through my spec here in just a second, but you can also get additional rage from crits in bear form, which will apply to all 3 swipes, right? If you swipe, hit 3 times, then you're getting 15 rage, you're getting back your swipe entirely. Now that's pretty rare, right? My crit chance I think is like 23 to 25%, so you don't really expect that to happen. But it is important to note that you can generate additional rage for your swipes through those talent points. Now let's briefly just talk about what gear I'm using so you can see that relative to yours, as well as the talent spec that I think is solid, and you can adjust it here and there, and I'll talk about where you can maybe put additional points or take points out as needed for your composition or group or gear. So for my gear, we pretty much have all best in slot gear from last phase, the new medallion. Everything on the left side is old, basically, besides the Drape of Dismantling, which is freaking nutty. Super happy to get this. Now, my right side is pretty decked. I don't know what happened, but I guess everyone decided that I should get these pieces, aka I figured out how to soft res properly. But we've got the Machinist gloves. Anyway, absolutely nutty gloves here. We've got the Skullduggery waistband. Again, this piece is crazy. I saw this and I soft resed it immediately. I'm not sure where, like this, it just destroys all the other belts out there. So fantastic. Also has the extra armor on it. We've got the Gnomer pants. This is just from the quest of killing the last boss. And I picked these up last night. Insane boots here for a tank. This gave me an extra 10% armor because I had the tier 1s from last phase that had 70 armor on them. So this just bumped my armor up by almost 500. So very crazy. You should be looking out for these items with the green bonus on them if you're worried about armor at all. Fantastic. I also have the Protector's Band from Rep. Just grab the higher rank ones from last phase. We got the Avenger's Pearl, and then I picked this up off the last boss, so I wasn't actually using this in the raid, but pretty nice. Obviously, the dodge chance is very helpful. It's damn little resistance. The armor is good in a pinch, so another cooldown to use there. I have the STV weapon. I don't know. Should change the enchant on this. I just haven't messed with it yet, but you should grab this if you don't already have it. It gives you a lot of attack power. 20 strength and 80 attack power. That's 100, close to 120 attack power just from this weapon, so that's fantastic. And then I have the Spirit Mind Expanding Mushroom. So that's it for the gear. Let's go ahead and talk about the Feral spec now. So these first 5 points go into Ferocity. I don't think there's any argument to be made whatsoever in not taking these 5 points. This reduces the cost of your swipe by 5. These are essential, so put these 5 points in. Now you start to get to a question once you move to the next tier. You've got Feral Instinct, which is increasing your threat by 3% per point. You've got Thick Hide, which is increasing your armor by 2% per point. And you've got Feral Aggression, which is increasing the reduction of your Demoralizing Roar by up to 40% or 8% per point. I think this is quite good. I think this is better than Thick Hide. Especially good when there's lots of mobs and you're getting most of the benefit out of this. It's not as good on single to 3 to 4 mobs. It's better when you have 10. So I personally didn't put points into this. I just took the raw threat, and I think I would suggest if it was your first time feral tanking that you should take this as well. Good feral tanks, or experienced feral tanks I should say, will be keeping up that demoralizing roar all the time. But if you're new and you're learning, you may not be, so you're probably not getting the max out of that ability. So Feral Instinct, you're going to be getting value out of it at all times, so that's why it's good. On the next tier, we've got Sharpened Claws, 6% crit. That's awesome. And I took for Feline Swiftness. If you're really trying to min-max, you don't take this, I think. But for me, I want to be able to run 30% quicker in Gnomer at all times. And if I want to kite away from the final boss, I can switch into Cat and run a little bit further, right? So to me, this utility is worth the 2 points, but these can go into that Feral Aggression that I was talking about, or maybe even Thick Hide if you're worrying about survivability. Then we have Feral Charge. This is great. You should definitely not skip out on this. It's really good for just continuously chain pulling mobs, which I think is the strategy you want for Druid. What I was doing, and I don't want to go too detailed into it yet, but essentially we're pulling 3 or 4 mobs, we're swiping, getting threat on them, pulling towards the next mob as we're swiping, like walking backwards, charge to the next mob, start the swipe train again, and just kind of slowly clear trash that way. So I would not skip this point, even though it doesn't have a ton of value. Its value's immeasurable, and that's what makes it good. Then we've got our next tier. I want to talk about Primal Fury. Now, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but essentially, this is what gives you a good amount of your rage from swipe. So 100% chance to get 5 additional rage when you critical strike in bear form. You're swiping, hitting 3 targets. That gives you, a chance to get up to 15 rage. Unlikely, but possible. But you usually, at least with my crit chance, am getting maybe 1 out of a swipe, which means your swipes now cost 33% less, which is just good. If you had a talent that's at that, you'd take it, right? So anyway, Primal Fury is very good. Then we've got Predatory Strikes. This is increasing our attack power in Cat, Bear, and Dire. This is just great. I skipped out on Blood Frenzy because this is purely a Cat talent. I also skipped out on Improved Shred, also purely a Cat talent. We've got Fairy Fire Feral. Definitely never skip this. Fantastic. You should be using this on pull. Reduce their armor. We've got Savage Fury. Increases the damage of swipe by 20%. That's all you really need to read, but it affects Maul as well. Very good talent. Heart of the Wild. This is a must-have talent. This is 20% increased stamina in bear form, and also 20% intellect overall, which is good if you need to be shifting and all that. And you can use Cat for 20% extra strength if you want. And then I went ahead and finished it up with Leader of the Pack. Get that 3% crit for the raid. I'm a big fan of Deep Feral. I did well in Kitty with Deep Feral last week. I personally would be a proponent of Deep Feral just in general. Power shifting is great and all, but you're providing a lot of value with this spec, and it's also just a fun spec to learn to manage your resources with the limited amount you're given instead of power shifting. Now, I'm not going to say that power shifting is worse or anything like that, but this is how I prefer to play, and so that's the talent set that I went with. Now, I briefly want to talk about the runes because I didn't cover it earlier. So for runes, I've got Wild Strikes on chest, I've got Lacerate on gloves, I've got Berserk on belt, I've got Skull Bash on legs, and I've got Survival Instincts on boots. For the feral macros, I've included what I think is essential here. Now, you have your first type of macro, which is your start attack macro. Essentially, the way this works is you're binding it to all your main abilities, so Lacerate, Maul, Swipe, and Faerie Fire. And this will just make sure that you're attacking as you're using those abilities. There are multiple ways. Like if you kill a mob and you start attacking another one, like target another one, you won't be instantly attacking again, which means just a loss in damage, loss in threat, loss in rage. So you want to be attacking all the time, so why not just apply that to all your abilities? So I highly recommend getting these. I think they're essential. And then we have the Dire Bear form swap here. So this is just taking you out of Dire Bear, putting you right back in. This is useful to get rid of movement impairing effects. The specific example that I have is the last boss in Gnomeregan. He'll put frost stacks on you in the second and fourth phase. You can use this macro to just get out of those, so you don't need a free action potion. Now I will say this and the next macro are dependent on not being on the global cooldown. So if you use this when you're on a global, so like you just use another ability, then you'll shift out. It'll shift you back in as soon as it can, but it may be delayed a little bit and you might get hit. So don't use this or the next macro when you're in a global cooldown. So the next one is for your healing potion. You could put Hellstones here. You could put a better potion. I think I have the not best potion on this one. But basically, this is your health pot, just like other tanks. Again, use this outside of the global cooldown, but this will give you that potion and then put you right back into bear form. Last thing before I get into the actual clips, I want to talk about just the threat toolkit that you have. Now, this doesn't really include any cooldowns or anything. This is just your main spammable abilities and how you should be using them. Now, first you have Lacerate. This is a single target stackable bleed. It stacks up to 5 times. It's kind of like how Sunder Armor and Devastate work. As the more applications you have, the more threat it's generating initially and also on the bleed. Now, I found that this was not doing a very good job on trash. Like, it's honestly, I would say that it'd be reasonable to swap this for Mangle on trash if you're trying to min max, because Mangle just does so much more damage on an initial threat. So this is really reserved for your bigger mobs and boss fights. Other than that, I honestly think spamming Swipe is probably just better. Now let's talk about Swipe. It's AoE, it hits 3 targets, and it's basically the best move that you have by a long shot. So if you have 2 mobs at least, you should probably just be spamming Swipe. The threat on this is crazy, which you'll see in the clips, but very good. Maul, this is how essentially you're dumping all your additional rage. This is basically your heroic strike from warriors. You're going to be queuing this up as you're swiping if you have additional rage, and that'll just mean your next auto attack will not generate rage. It'll use rage, but it'll do additional damage and generate additional threat. Lastly, we have Demoralizing Roar. I think this is totally fine to use on basically every single pull. I like to keep this up on boss fights, but I did want to mention it's obviously more useful the more mobs you have, and I think, as far as I'm aware, it's the only bear ability to hit everything besides like your AoE taunt that's on a 10-minute cooldown. So this will get you that initial threat on a pack of mobs, assuming you have more than 3, right? If they're unswipeable as far as hitting all of them at once, then this can give you some threat on all of them so they don't run straight to your healers. So talking over some of the clips, this is what I describe as like your typical pull and how I think you should be pulling. Now, I'm not doing this perfectly, but basically we're aggroing the mobs, we're spamming Swipe. You can see I'm just swipe, 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 swipe. As I'm moving, I'm just continuing to spam Swipe, turn around. Probably don't want to turn your full back to them, but I'm not too worried, honestly. Like, if I lose threat on some of these, it's not a big deal. But we're just spamming Swipe, right? And we're filling Maul. You can see me select it there. We're filling Maul as we can because we have plenty of rage. And you can see the crit to rage ratio, getting that extra 5 rage is making a big deal here. So let's go ahead and move on to the next pull. For this next pull, we have a bit more AoE. So I charge in, I'm doing my Demoralizing Roar right there, and then I just start spamming Swipe. And I should be using Maul here as well. Ideally, you want to be mauling the targets that have a yellow or red bar that you don't have aggro on. But you can see I'm keeping threat on these against a Warlock's Hellfire. There's the in combat charge, which is really nice. And we're just continuing to spam those swipes, which really, I think the takeaway from this video is just spam Swipe. But anyway, let's go ahead and do what a boss fight would look like. Now for boss fights, you're going to want to put on Faerie Fire Feral immediately, and then your goal is to get the 5 stacks of Lacerate as quickly as possible. Now this fight is relatively straightforward. I may speed up the clip to run it through, but basically once you have those 5 stacks on, you want to ensure you're keeping up Demoralizing Roar, which I'm not here. You can look at the boss's debuff. I don't have it. And then Faerie Fire Feral, it only lasts 40 seconds. You want to be reapplying this as you have an open GCD. The reason I say that is because there's a good chance that these mobs are resisting it. So I like to apply it potentially up to 18 seconds before it falls off. The reason I say that is because it has a 6-second cooldown, so that gives you a few chances to apply it before it's actually going to fall off. And then, if it falls off and you try and reapply it and it resists, then you're losing out on that extra time of having additional armor reduction. So I'd highly recommend that you're keeping it up a little more than just, it's about to fall off, because I did notice a lot of resistances. I think we actually see an example right here. So falls off, I think I notice it, and it got resisted. Yeah, so that's prime example of why you wouldn't want to do that. But other than that, it's really just spamming Lacerate and making sure you have enough HP. You have the cooldowns of Survival Instincts, you have Frenzied Regeneration, you have health pots. So be using all your available tools, and you should do just fine. And that's all I wanted to cover in the video. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Please consider subscribing. It helps me and the channel out a ton. But I would just say that I think bear tanking is a lot of fun. It's very powerful right now. I haven't played Horde, so I don't know how good Shaman is, but I would assume Shaman's probably the best tank, and Paladin's a close second. I think with these changes, Feral is very close to Paladin, most likely. The swipe just felt absolutely fantastic. The threat generated on them was beautiful. So if you're just tab swiping on almost every single pull, you're probably going to do really well for yourself. But anyway, thanks everyone for watching the video. Cam out.